Okay. I will, sir. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, we got some more people coming. Let's see, I don't see no new folks, I'll go see that. Oh, I know who that is. I haven't seen Mark for a while. I'm Dwayne.
Amber.
Amber, nice to meet you, sure enough.
This is Cindy.
Yeah, boy, hold it up. Y'all been eating meetings and stuff?
You're just in time.
We got to talk there today, we working on some other stuff. Next part, what about that, work back in.
Profession?
You went to Mexico?
Puerto Rico.
Oh, Puerto Rico. Happy birthday. Do I dare ask how old you are? 58? Okay, that's not too bad.
Okay. We're going to, be in First Peter, the, third chapter tonight. While I'm thinking about it, get off track, a couple people already asked, we talked about putting a little box back there in the foyer for donations for the building fund, because some people said something about wanting to do that, so that's what that little box is back there for. And, I put it in the bulletin, but if anybody wants to make donations, that way they can do that. There's envelopes back there, or they can just put it on their check if they want to. And we're not trying to push anybody to do that. I'm just saying it because some people said, hey, we'd like to do that, so that's what it's for. Peter, in his writings, we were studying in First Peter chapter 2, and he was talking about submission to the government. We talked about that, and then talked about submission to masters and so forth. So he gets down into chapter 3, and it's kind of, Peter is very systematic the way that he writes, I think. So now that he gets over to women being in submission to their husbands, and then he also deals with husbands. And so, before the gospel, women, many women in non-Greek countries, they were just treated basically like slaves. It's very deplorable the way they were treated. And Aristotle wrote that among he called them Barbicans, the Greeks is what he's talking about, women and slaves held the same rank. And I don't know about you, but over my years, I've seen some situations where women were treated very, very cruelly by their husbands. And I think the worst one that I ever saw, never knew, and I've talked about it some before, but there was a couple in Graham that lived out in the country, and when I was going up there, it wasn't at Loving Highway, it was another little church there in town. It's where I would go and preach. And so they would always ask us to go out and eat with them out to their house, and they lived out in the country. And I thought it was kind of peculiar because she would get the meal ready, and he'd be sitting there basically with his fork and his knife, like a lot of men used to do, and waiting on her. And she had to. He drank coffee, didn't drink anything but coffee. So he would make her wait until it had the prayer and it was time to eat. And then he insisted that when his coffee was poured into the cup, it had to be a certain temperature, very, very hot. And if she didn't do that, she got into trouble. And we found out later on, after she divorced him, and these people were in their 80s, but she told us that he would. They had a farm, and she would have to go out with him on the tractor and so forth. And she said that if she didn't do everything right, then he would beat her, and she had to tie sheets to the foot of the bed and pull herself up because she was so sore in the morning. Well, when she finally decided it was time to get rid of that situation, she divorced him, and he actually wound up marrying again. He wouldn't let her call her in-law, her relatives. That was forbidden. So he married again, and the next person that he married, she didn't put up with that very well, and so he killed her. And so I'm telling you, you know, there are situations that we don't know about where people are treated horribly. And women back in that day and time, they were just, like I say, they were treated like slaves. So when Peter writes about this, it wasn't something just to have a discussion about. He was wanting these people to understand that God has rules. But he starts off, he says, wives likewise, after he talked about the being submission to masters and so forth. He said, wives likewise, be submissive to your own husbands. And when he uses that word submissive, I tried to find another word to use, but I think that when you look at the marriage relationship like the Bible teaches us, it's a partnership, and we're submissive to each other. One doesn't rule over the other, and you know, they often talk about well, the women are the weaker sex, and I understand that, but years ago I read this story, this little boy, two little boys were talking to each other, and you know how they are when they're certain ages, and the one said, well, my daddy can beat up your daddy, and the other little boy said, that ain't nothing, my mother does it all the time. You know, so, you know, but submissiveness is not something that's demanded, it's something that you wish to do, you want to do, and we, husbands and wives, should be submissive to one another. But in this case, what Peter's talking about was, of course, this is the early days of Christianity, and so sometimes the wives would become Christians and the husbands not, and that was quite common even when I was first in the church. There were a lot of times where the husbands didn't come to church, the wives did. My in-laws, I was told by my wife that whenever the kids were younger, they had 4 girls and a boy. And so the girls went to church with mama, but the boy never went. And so finally her daddy got to think about that, and realized he wasn't being a good example, and so he started going to church, and the boy was baptized. But what Peter's talking about, if you have a situation where the wife's going to church, and she's being the good example, and the husband's not, Peter says that they might be one without a word, just by the example. And like I say, back many years ago, it doesn't seem to be that way so much now, but I talked to a lot of women about that, and they would complain because their husbands wouldn't come to church. I said, just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Because you're setting the example, and you're going to perhaps one of these days make him realize that the reason that she's acting like she is, being kind and nice and doing the things that he wants her to do, is because of the Christian influence. And so I think that's what Peter was talking about. Some of the ideas that they...
You know, Dwayne, whenever Sandy became a Christian and decided she wasn't going to follow this old clod around to ungodly places, you know, I figured out that I wasn't number one in her life.
Yeah.
You know.
There's another man, wasn't it? Yeah, name's Jesus.
And so if she had not have done that, I would not have been,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
impressed or whatever, you know.
And I think...
Because I'm not, if somebody like me is not gonna go to church on Sunday morning, say, I think I need to get baptized.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, well, and that's, you know, I think that that's one of the reasons why that I think that Phil made the decision that he did, was because Carrie has been very faithful, and we've talked about that over the years, you know, and I said, just keep doing it, because one of these days, because he thought that he was okay, but then when he saw the way that she acted, the way that she treats him and so forth, I think that caused him to think about that, and so, yeah, and the thing of it is even if it's not the wife, our children, if the daddy's not going, kids say, I don't have to go, he don't go, and so it's a whole family situation. But the things that Peter saw in that day and time, it was very, very cruel, sometimes violent, and so Peter was encouraging these women, and you know, I can't imagine how hard it would be for a woman Sunday after Sunday, getting up, getting the kids ready, having to have the meal ready for when she comes home, and going to church. I mean, that's hard. And I admire the women that do that. And so Peter is encouraging them to just keep doing what they're doing. He said, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. And the fear, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, but they have a hard time understanding why we should fear God. Well, it's not a fear. I mean, I fear the punishment. I certainly don't want to go to hell. But also fear disappointing Him. And I think that that's something that Peter might have been speaking about also. I want to call it a very healthy respect for God's power. Put it like that. And I think that's what he's talking about. It's, you know, when you become a Christian and you serve God, it gets to the point where it's not something that, I mean, you just want to do it. You just want to do it. And sometimes it's not easy, but you just want to do it. But then he gets into something else that in fact, I was talking to someone today about this next part, but there's one other thing that this man wrote that I liked it. I like words, and I like the way that people sometimes phrase things. But when Peter's talking about without a word, this guy said, there are times when silent eloquence is more effective than vigorous and vehement debate. And I think that's a good way to put it, you know. And I've said it over and over again. I don't like arguments. Don't like to get into heated discussions. Don't want to do that. Used to do it. Don't want to do it anymore. And so, you know, I see no purpose for it. And the older I get, the more selfish I am of exerting my energy. I just want to get into those things because there's no winners. They're just not. When Peter is talking about this next section, attire. I want to get into that. In fact, Lance and I talked about this today because of another situation. But before I get into that, I want to do something else. And this is probably not exactly relating to this, but I think that we need to talk about it. In Peter's day, like I say, the women were considered, you know, just almost like chattel. But today, women have much more freedom, and they should have, and they should be equal everywhere except in church leadership. And I thought about this a lot this last week, and I haven't talked about it very much here, but I want to tonight. When you begin to have a more equal situation where men and women both are equal in all ways, one of the problems that comes up is that God has restraints. I'm going to call it governors. And the governors are the Word. And so I see on television and Facebook and these various places where these women say, well, we can teach just as well as a man can. And you know what? I agree with them. But God doesn't. But God doesn't. He agrees with them being examples and all that sort of thing. But he says, I've got some rules. And, you know, there are rules that I don't like. I had there was a discussion there the other day. This woman was talking about how these people were driving so slow from Bridgeport out to Runaway Bay at the speed limit, she said, 65 miles an hour, and they ought to drive that. And so sometimes I can't help it. I just got on there and I said, 65 is the maximum, not the minimum. you know. And I think, you know, sometimes we look for ways to get around rules. She just didn't like the fact that people were driving 65, they were slowing, under 65, they were slowing her down. Well, when you talk to, look at the rules that God has as far as worship is concerned, because he says that a woman is to remain silent in the church. That was one of his rules. And, you know, in 1 Corinthians 14:34, or 14, he gets into this discussion. And, you know, the problem is that when you read the Bible, he's talking about, in this particular section, down 1 Corinthians 14, starting in verse 26, he's talking about the church. He's talking about worship services. And so when you start talking about, well, women have just as much right, I mean, they shouldn't be treated as inferiors in the marriage relationship, then it kind of carries over sometimes, and they say, well, you know, we shouldn't be that way in the church either. I know that Joyce Meyer's got a lot of good thoughts. I know there's other women like that do have. But I want to read this to you, and I welcome your input. You get down to 1 Corinthians 14:34. And I have taught English. I've studied English. I know English pretty well. And so when Paul says this, let your women keep silent in the churches. And he's talking about worship services. For they are not permitted to speak. Now, I want you to explain to me how that some woman can come along and say, well, I don't have to be quiet. Find me the scripture that says it that way, and then we'll discuss it. And so the problem is that women are equal. We're equal in all ways. As far as we can all be, you know, a woman can be a governor, a woman can be president, and all of those sort of things. But they say, well, we don't have to. And this is just Paul's opinion. No. When you read the Word of God, I don't care who's writing it, it's not that writer's opinion, it's God's opinion. And so this is his rule. And then he says they are to be submissive. And that's why that I got to, when I was reading back in 1 Peter, I went over this part here, because, again, the submissiveness doesn't mean to be cowardly, that type of thing. It means to be obedient. And then he gives a reason here. He says, or rather, and when I've taught this in the past, I've had women come up to me and say, well, I don't have to, because it says let them be submissive, ask their own husbands. And I've taught this before. What the Greek actually says is, let the woman ask a man away from the assembly. I used to say there was no Greek word for husband. There actually is, but it's kind of a combination of words. But what Paul is saying is, okay, if you have something that you need to say or you need to ask, you don't interrupt the service to do it. You ask your husband or a man away from the assembly. And that's the way God did it. That's the way he structured it. And so someone says, well, I don't like that. Well, there are some things I don't like either, you know, that God has said, but I got to do them because you told me to do them. And so the whole idea that Paul has here and that Peter had in 1 Peter is he was just wanting people to understand that God has an orderly way to do it, and this is God's decision, not mine. James?
On mine, I've got a mark where it says, let them be submissive as the law also says. Well, it references Genesis 3:16.
Well, and that was really the reason that is given as to why God made this rule, because what would have happened if Eve had been more submissive and hadn't tried to persuade her husband to sin? And I get tired of that eat the apple thing. That wasn't the thing. It was disobedience. And so, God has reasons. And just like with a child, when you are raising a child, God tells us, that the child is to be disciplined. I didn't really like that rule back when I was growing up, but that was God's rule. And my dad, even though he didn't go to church, he followed that rule, you know. And so, you know, I just think we just need to, and when you read that, I'm gonna read the rest of 1 Corinthians 34, just a little bit more. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says, and that's the reference back to the law of Moses, or actually the patriarchal law.
Well, it was back when, he was talking to, Adam and Eve.
Yeah, it's patriarchal law, yeah. And if they want to learn something, let their ask their own husbands at home. And then he says, for it is shameful for women to speak in church. Now, again, I'm not God, and so I can't explain all that. But I know that I have, in times past, in preaching some places that I've been, there were some women that were quite vocal, and they would they would be disruptive, and I would go to this scripture and I said, let's talk about this after the service. You know, you're really out of order. It's not. This is, and women. I'm just making a general rule. Women are more likely to be. We've seen that here in our congregation years ago. They're more emotional at times than what men are. Doesn't mean that it's always that way, but we had one situation where the guys had made a decision about something, and there were 3 women that didn't like it very well, and so Lance came through the door one evening, and man, they attacked him, and they were totally wrong. They were totally wrong. If they had wanted to talk to him about it, it wasn't in that manner. And then Lance said the men discussed it. No, they didn't. And I thought, none of y'all were at the meeting. And so it's just a matter of having order. It's not condemning or criticizing or convicting someone. It's God, this is the way I want it done. And then he says in verse 35, they want to ask anything, let them ask their husbands or a man away from the assembly. It's actually the literal Greek scripture. But when Peter's talking about this over here in 1 Peter, it's a little different situation. It's not necessarily talking about the worship service, but it can, and that's the thing that we need to understand. But then we want to get down to the next part of it, because even with men sometimes we have a problem as far as leadership is concerned. The guy that came over and worked on the air conditioners, whatever day it was, Monday I guess, he was working out here, and I was out there to see what we needed to have done, and he said, how long have you been the pastor of this church? I said, I never have been. And he kind of looked at me, and I said, I ain't a pastor. I'm a church member, and my duty or my work with the church is to preach. But you can't have one pastor in a church. And so we had an opportunity to have a Bible discussion, if you please. One man rule. One church that I'm familiar with, I've heard the guy many times say, I'm the pastor of this church. And I want to say, no, you ain't, because there's no such thing.
Or reverend.
Yes. Paul told Titus, appoint elders in every church or congregation. It's a plural thing. You can't have one man doing it. And so all of these things that Peter is teaching here, and Paul in his writings, is just to have organization in the church. That's what you want. You don't want to have disruptive things.
You know, Dwayne, we see all these scenarios in a business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't operate a church like a business.
No.
You know, if we do, you know, we're gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
You know, because you can't make the same kind of decisions
No.
in the church as you do in a business.
And Jimmy, I really like that comment, because there are, even in churches of Christ today, wanting to be structured like that. Instead of having elders and deacons and a preacher, they have it set up like a corporation, like a board of directors. They have men and women, all of them involved in various positions, calling them different titles and stuff, and God doesn't even know what they're talking about. It's not in the book. And so I think it's important.
Whenever we talk about men,
Mhm.
you know, sometimes when there's problems in church, it's because the men didn't take the responsibility.
Yes.
That they were supposed to take.
Yes, exactly,
And they
exactly.
didn't stand up and say, no, we're not gonna do this.
I would not want to have work with a congregation where it was only men. Wouldn't wanna do it. That would be, I wouldn't enjoy that at all. Because God intended for us to have a family unit. That's why he teaches that men and women should marry and have children, even with elders, church leaders. Family units are so great. But the thing of it is when you have a family unit, again, you have to have rules and order. And I'm not a marriage counselor, but for some reason or other, over the years, I've got drug into a lot of those situations. And the first thing that I always see is, well, guys, if you would have done your job, you wouldn't have this problem. If you had been the leader in your family and raised your children and took them to church and all, and the wife wouldn't have to depend on, do all the work that you should have been doing, you wouldn't have these problems. So God just wants us to be a unit, to be a family. And then the next thing that he gets into, and I've covered all of it, I've just kind of scanned through this stuff, and if you have questions later on, I'll be glad to talk about it. But he says in verse 3, he says, do not let, still talking to the women, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair. I read that, I think it's Aristotle that was talking about this, and he said it was the women's hair back then, I guess I'm going to say ungodly women. They would have these beehive hairdos and all gold woven in their hair and all this kind of stuff, and it was so ridiculous they couldn't even touch a hair and get it out of order. And so when he comes down to this point, he says, don't let your adornment be merely outward. I was talking to someone this afternoon, and there was a third party that was involved, and Lance was telling me this person said that, well, it's wrong for a woman even to wear makeup. I don't find that in my Bible. I know a lot of women in holiness churches that wear no makeup. They don't arrange their hair, and that's fine. But it doesn't say that in the Bible. And it doesn't say that a woman is more godly if she doesn't wear makeup. Now, you see, and I can think of one woman that I knew in one of the churches where I went, and she didn't even have to worry about what she's going to wear at Halloween. She's already dressed up before that time. I mean, she had that stuff gobbed on her and all this stuff. Was it attractive? No, it wasn't attractive. But what Paul is, or Peter is saying here, he's not saying that you can't do that, but he says, don't let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart. And that's what we should see. I heard on the news this morning that I think it's Dallas Police Department. They decided now that it's all right for the officers to wear baseball caps issued by the department, and they can even wear some jewelry. And I thought, well, I guess so, but I mean, I think that what God is looking at is just, well, two things. Number one is common sense. I've seen men and women both that have 40 earrings in their ears, and that's not very attractive to me. I don't know what it is to them, I suppose. But he's just saying just common sense. And the number one thing that I think we have to focus on is we should dress ourselves and act in a way that we don't draw attention to ourselves. And I'm sorry, but one of the reasons why I think a lot of these people dress with the ungodly ways that they are is to draw attention to themselves. Well, that takes attention away from God.
And it's kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of idolatry of yourself.
It is. It is.
Trying to grandstand or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Well, and exactly what Neil is saying, people value themselves
Mhm.
more than they value the message that they're there to receive.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
church.
yeah.
Do you ever see people
Irregardless-
just, they're doing this all the time, you know?
Irregardless of what they wear,
Mhm.
as long as their heart is in the right place.
Yes, yes. I've never had an issue anywhere with anybody about it. I mean, that's up to them, how they wanna do it, dress and all that kind of stuff, but I just think we need to focus on the fact that we want our attention to be given to God.
Right.
I'm the same way with the garbs that these preachers wear. Coming with these hats on top of their head and 40 robes and it's 900 degrees outside. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's foolish, you know? I mean, we just come here, we're all God's kids, and our focus needs to be on Him and His message, and all this other stuff needs to be laid aside. And our ladies do such a wonderful job of dressing themselves well and looking like godly women, and I'm so thankful for that. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on before I get away from this, and I didn't read all these verses, we probably will do that Sunday, but there's another thing that when you look at this as far as the women wanting to preach, and I don't hear so much anymore, but there for a while, you would look around and there were all these husband and wives teams. And yeah, they're still around. But there seemed like there was more of them back then. And one of the things that they would say, the husband would say, well, I've given my wife authority to speak. I ain't got no authority other than what's in the book. And neither does that person. Neither does that preacher, that man. I don't have the authority to tell someone they can do something that the book doesn't say. And so, you know, my point is we just need to stay with the Word. And we don't need to try to change it or modify it or get it to fit the way we think and the way we feel. Just do what God said. Years ago, there was a guy that, a kid that's coming to preacher school there in Dallas. And I knew his family. They were from up in Arkansas and good people. But he come to one of the sessions one evening, and his car was not working right. And so we tried to find out what was wrong with it. It didn't have any oil in it. And he said, I don't know where to put it. Now, your daddy let you leave home and drive all the way down here in your car, and you don't even know where to put your oil or how to check it? So we taught him. Well, you know, one of the purposes to me of assemblies and worship is instruction. And it's always been with God. Instruction's always been important. And so, you know, when we instruct, we also have to obey. I can't teach something that I'm not doing myself. I have to teach by example. Otherwise, my message is meaningless. And so, when Peter is talking about all these things, he's saying these are the things that you need to do. In verse 7, he switches over to husbands. And he says, husbands, likewise dwell with them, talking about the wives, with understanding. With understanding. I'm not trying to make jokes about what women, because there are women that are a lot smarter than me. But in other words, you need to understand how they feel and where they're coming from and their emotions. And he said, giving honor to the wife. I think that a man that doesn't treat his wife with that kind of respect, with honor, really needs to go back and understand a little bit about being a husband. It doesn't mean that the wife has to, the husband has to just agree with everything the woman says, but she doesn't have to agree with everything he says either. And so a marriage is a union. I say partnership sometimes, and I think that that's true too. But it's an equal partnership. I've been in partnerships before in business, and it's always understood when we formed a partnership that we're going to do this together. I'm not going to make all the decisions. I don't have all the rules. We'll do it together. Well, it's the same way with a marriage. And when a marriage works like that, and it doesn't mean that, my wife, she couldn't cook. If I had depended on it and said, well, it's your job to cook, and I'll just eat what you, I wasn't going to do that because I knew she couldn't cook, so I didn't do that. But we had a union, we had a partnership, And that's the way a marriage is supposed to be. And sometimes there's one partner that's stronger than the other, but you still work together and have a happy relationship, Neil.
I heard somebody, I was talking to somebody about marriage at work, and they said, it's about not dying on a hill, either one of you.
It's
right?
true.
So you
Yeah.
gotta give, when it matters to them more than it does to you, just give. And when it matters to you more than it does to them, then they can give.
I've
But
told,
you just don't
yeah.
die on that hill,
Yeah.
neither one.
I've told you this before, but when my wife, we were dating, and I went to Oklahoma, and I wanted to bring her down here and see where I lived and all that sort of thing. And I took her to, it's Farmer's Daughter Restaurant in Fort Worth, and that was one of the upper places. I mean, it had red velvet on the walls, and I mean, I was out of place, but I was trying to impress her. And so we got there, and I didn't know what to get, and she ordered ribs. I had never eaten ribs before. And they brought those ribs out, and she picked them up with her fingers, and I thought, my goodness, I've got me a hillbilly girl here. She taught me how to eat ribs, you know. So you learn things from each other, and that's what you're supposed to do. You learn things from each other. I've enjoyed it, guys and girls, and so if anything else y'all wanna bring up, we'll talk about it, but otherwise, we'll just have a
I
song.
didn't know there was any other way to eat ribs.
Well, I